Perhaps I can just start with the big picture, something that you are already familiar with, but I think it's worth reiterating because of the context that we are in and why some of the things we are doing take on greater saliency, if you like. So the starting point I would say is, the economic environment, the prospects obviously remain quite grim. And this is arising from COVID-19's impact, not just on our healthcare and our social aspects of life, but in the economic domain. And as we emerge from our circuit breaker and begin to progressively open the economy, I think businesses are going to have to deal with the challenges of opening up and sustaining their business and finding new ways and new modalities to operate. And this economic impact, I think, and the potential challenges that we face are manifested in the growth forecast that you've seen for Singapore and also what we've seen for the world as a whole. For Singapore, as you know, the projection is for -4 to -7% contraction this year from MTI. So I think what we face is a challenging economic environment going forward. And in that environment for businesses, I think the challenge is going to be how do you sustain business going forward and adapt to the new normal and find new modalities to do the business. And I think for workers and Singaporeans in general, I think the overriding consideration is going to be jobs. And that is also the overriding economic imperative for us as a government. We want to focus on jobs, job creation, and how we can then place Singaporeans in those jobs. That was the focus of DPM Heng's Fortitude budget. And that is also why we have the National Jobs Council, which DPM Heng announced and SM Tharman chairs. And I'm a member of that council together with other ministers and members in the private sector. So as you've seen, the Jobs Council, the sort of large, broad objective is to try and identify 100,000 job opportunities. So really, we're going to spare no effort to identify these jobs, whether they are permanent jobs, temporary jobs, part-time jobs, and also traineeships. But basically, job opportunities which will allow Singaporeans to participate productively in the economy, even in this challenging time, allow them to gain experience and acquire skills which will be valuable to them, not just in this period, but certainly for the period beyond when the economy begins to recover and grow. So in that context, the question then that arises is, where are these opportunities likely to be? And this is where the whole realm of digitalization becomes quite prominent. As you know, digitalization is not a new message. We have in fact been saying this for quite some time. But it has taken on added relevance and salience in the COVID-19 environment. Because now when businesses are compelled to transact online, when we have to work from home, when students have to learn from home, and we have to interact virtually, then the whole value proposition of digitalization becomes crystallized. And that's why I think one of the biggest impacts of COVID-19 has been to demonstrate that digitalization is no longer an optional extra, it's actually a critical necessity for a business, not just because of business continuity, which in itself is important, but also because it is a way for us to create new avenues to transact, to do business, and find new opportunities. So that is the context in which we are now doubling down on our digitalization effort at the national level, because there is clearly a need and an opportunity for us to give this impetus, digitalization impetus, a renewed push and urgency. So one of the things that, in terms of jobs is in job creation is the ICT sector, which supports digitalization. But I want to emphasize ICT is not just about the vertical where there is the technical skills and the depth is necessary. That in itself is an important domain where we can create opportunities, but it's also a horizontal. And the horizontal is relevant because every sector now, for example, whether you're in retail, whether you're in food services, you could be in financial services and so on, every sector now needs digitalization strategies. And people who are in that sector, who may not necessarily be deep tech people, but those who understand both the sector and the nature of the business there, but also have enough knowledge of technology in order to see how it can become an essential part of the business operation and strategy going forward. So that's why you see many businesses now beginning to find new ways, whether it is the existing staff being trained to acquire these new skills or bringing in new people to do those sorts of functions for them in their organizations. So what we are trying to do is identify those sorts of opportunities and then find ways to place Singaporeans in those jobs and give them the appropriate training. So a couple of specific things I would like to highlight to you. One that you're already familiar with is our TESA mid-career effort, because we do know that there is a cohort of mid-career professionals out there who are looking for opportunities in these sorts of sectors. And the TESA mid-career advanced program is really to help them make that transition, giving them the opportunity then to start careers in these new domains. The other area that we've just introduced is the company-led training initiative, which really is to work with companies to generate 3,000 job opportunities over the next 2 to 3 years. And again, this will be one where we place and train, meaning identify the jobs, place the individuals, and then work with the employer to give the training, and government will come in with the appropriate financial support in that regard. So again, this is another example of how we are doing it. So these two initiatives that I've talked about, they're basically part of the larger TESA initiative, Tech Skills Advance initiative. But what I think is most important here, the Tech Skills Accelerator initiative, but what is most important here is we're trying to identify the jobs, place Singaporeans in those jobs, and then give them the training. So that's the crux of the effort that we are doing on the jobs front. Then if I go on from there, we are also looking at the whole digitalization effort across the economy and in society. So you know that we have been running this SMEs Go Digital program for quite some time now. And SMEs, as you know, are the largest cohort of companies that we have, and they collectively employ a significant proportion of our population in terms of our workforce. So what we want to do is help the SMEs make this transition. So to date, about 20,000 SMEs have adopted various kinds of SME solutions. What we want to do is to accelerate that process. So one of the initiatives that you've heard of is this Digital Resilience Bonus, which is targeted in particular at two sectors which have been probably hardest hit by this whole COVID-19 and the circuit breaker measures: retail and food and bev. So as we open up and they try and find ways to restart their business and start continuing linking up with their customers, digital solutions, whether they are customer-facing solutions like online marketing, digital payments, and the ability to then fulfill the order by doing deliveries. That's one side, customer-facing. Internal to the organization in terms of, say, inventory management, HR management, and so on. So those are more productivity enhancing, efficiency enhancing measures. And ultimately also higher order things like data analytics and so on. So for all of this, we're trying to support them. And this digital resilience bonus, and I think they can get up to about $10,000 if they adopt pre-qualified solutions from our SME Go Digital program. I think this is going to be an important thing for them as well. So that's on the enterprise side. But we are also moving, as you have heard, and I want to emphasize, deeper into the community, in a sense, into domains and segments of our society which some might consider to be the most challenging in terms of digitalization. So hawkers, for example, hawkers in a way are at the front line of our business interaction with the community. Everybody goes to a hawker center to buy food. It's part of our culture. So if we can get hawkers onto, for example, the SGQR digital payment solution, that at the very atomistic, at the very grassroots level, we are making a very significant transition. And that will have not just the impact at the transaction level, but at a systemic level. It sends a clear signal about what we are doing and how we are adapting to a new environment. So the Hawkers Go Digital is an important part of the work. And the other aspect is, of course, Seniors Go Digital. Again, our seniors would be seen as a cohort of our population who might perhaps be least inclined to adopt technology. Now, I want to say at the outset, my own view is age is not the barrier here, because I've seen many seniors who have actually demonstrated that it's attitude that counts. So I've seen many who have adopted technology and been really using it for all kinds of things. So and if you look at other countries like China, for example, where the use of QR codes for payment, it's ubiquitous. And everybody who went to China used to comment about this, how remarkable it is and the way it's done. So it is not beyond our ken by any means, but it requires an effort, and we need to also acknowledge that there may be concerns, and we have to deal with those concerns. But the Seniors Go Digital program, again, is a very targeted at the seniors to try and bring them into this. And it's not digitalization for the sake of digitalization. It's about digitalization as a means to a better life. More conveniences and more ways to access information, and if you're working, to be more productive and so on. That's the objective, enhancing our lives. So, the scale and scope, I think I've emphasized this, but let me just say again, our scale, we want to cover all 112 hawker centers over the next 2 to 3 months in successive phases. And we also want to reach out to the 100,000 seniors over the next 9 months or so by March next year. So this is a major effort, both in terms of its scale and its scope. And there are many segments of the population we are trying to reach out to. We are reaching out to them through different modalities, and we also have to find ways to, in a sense, the different agencies are involved in this effort, whether it is IMDA, the new SG Digital Office, Enterprise Singapore, NEA, JTC, and so on. And as a result of this, we have decided that government has to double down and make a concerted push for digitalization. And to oversee this, we are establishing a ministerial committee, which will be jointly chaired by me and Minister Chan Chun Sing. And here, through this committee, we will be able to oversee and coordinate the effort towards enterprises, whether they are large enterprises, SMEs, or micro enterprises, and also the digital inclusion and digital society effort, whether it is with seniors, our broad population, and our workers, and so on. So this is going to be an important part. And I want to emphasize, at the end of the day, we have very clear plans and targets in place, but execution is going to be key. How we get this done. And that is why we have established the SG Digital Office. The SG Digital Office will be the point of coordination for many of these efforts. And that is also why I said that we will employ, and if you remember, I mentioned this earlier, 1,000 digital ambassadors. Again, this is going to be our way of embedding the effort at the community level in order to give it the kind of grassroots level push that it needs to bring about the kind of digitalization movement outcome that we seek. So that's another example of how we're going about it. And we're doing this at at an unprecedented pace, if you like. So let me just give you an example of what I mean by we are establishing the ministerial committee. We have set up, I announced this initiative about 10 days ago or so on the 31st of May. Since then, we've established this ministerial committee. We have established the SG Digital Office. In terms of digital ambassadors, we have deployed 200 digital ambassadors on the ground already, right? And in terms of the hawker center coverage, our teams have covered almost half the hawker centers in Singapore in this period already. And they are committed to finish their first sweep of all the hawker centers in the next week or two. So that gives you an idea of the pace at which we are moving. So when I say we are doubling down, it's not just in terms of the resource allocation and the plans, but also in terms of the execution and how we are overseeing the execution. So this is an important thrust for us, and I think it's going to have valuable outcomes both in the near term but also in the long term for our community and our society. If I can just make a few more points on it, because the issue is execution but also about digital inclusion, working with partners and addressing concerns that are quite real, and we need to find ways to deal with them. So digital inclusion, meaning we have to make sure we are reaching out to all these parties like hawkers and seniors, and therefore partners become very important. So the hawker center associations, the hawker representatives, the shop owners association and so on the ground, they are going to be very important partners for us. Same way the grassroots organizations and the grassroots advisors, because working with them, we will be able to go deep into the community, establish the linkages in order to get this transition done. At the same time, we're also working with corporate partners who have the technology or the volunteers and so on who can be mobilized in order to support the work that we are doing through the SG Digital Office and the digital ambassadors. And the last point I would make is we do need to address concerns that these different segments that we are trying to reach out to may have. So let me start, for example, hawkers. One set of concerns may be around the technology itself. How complicated is it? Do I need a machine or what? So that's something that we are addressing, and we've explained to them clearly how the SG QR code works. You don't need any equipment other than the QR code and then phones, and you can settle it. But they also worry about, what if I run into problems with this? And also things like, how will I know a transaction has been done? So for example, the solution that we are working with Nets on allows them to get a vocal signal in either English or Mandarin to say that a transaction has been done. That's, I think, on an Android platform, but if it's an iOS platform, they may be able to use a sound or something. And then you can see it on your screen, or the customer can show the screen as well to show a transaction has been done. But this is an example of what we need to do in order to address some of the real concerns. I'm in fact having a webinar with a group of hawkers from my own hawker center in West Coast later today. And this is part of our ongoing conversation. I had a session earlier with a larger group and a different set of people, and now with my own, to better understand what they might have concerns about and see how we can deal with them. The other type of concern, for example, is for seniors. One question is language. Will I be able to, connect with the language and so on? So as I said, the payment solution that we're working on has got at least dual language possibilities. And we're working with all the parties involved to see how we can get more of these digital applications into multiple languages, which would be necessary for our seniors. I think that's important. And that is an effort that we are committed to, but we need the cooperation of all the other stakeholders to make it happen. At the same time, another concern, and I think some have articulated this in different fora, is will this whole digitalization push make seniors who may not be so keen on tech feel alienated from society. So I want to go back to where I started on this. Digitalization is not an end in itself. It's the means to an end, and the end is to improve our lives. So as far as our focus is concerned, these digital initiatives are to give our seniors more options in the way they get information, in the way that they communicate with the family, and in the way they may transact or make payments and so on. It is not about taking away existing options. So at the end of the day, if it is too difficult, then obviously the existing solutions are available to them. But I would want to make two further points on that. One, I don't think we should underestimate the ability of our seniors to do the job, to make this transition. In fact, as I said, there are many examples of seniors who have adapted to this marvelously, and their inspirations, and some of them are so adept, and I've had conversations, and they're doing a lot more than I have envisaged myself doing with tech and so on. So that's one side of it. The other side is, the message is, they don't have to walk this journey alone. This journey, that's why we have these digital ambassadors. We're going to establish nodes in every division in Singapore, so that the people are there for them to consult, to have a way to interact, to get guidance, and to be able to then feel that they are journeying together with people. So whether you're a hawker, a wet market stall holder, a senior, in general in the community, it is a way to give you the chance to find people who can help you in that regard. So it's a bit of a long preamble, but I wanted to contextualize it so that you have a sense of the overall broad sweep of what we are doing, and then I can take questions now.
I just want to clarify about the ministerial committee. So you said it has been set up since May 31st. I'm not sure if I got that right. And then if yes, have you and Min Chan met for any discussions, and what has been discussed so far? And also another question is, you've mentioned a lot of things that need to be done, but in the very near term, is there a top priority for this ministerial committee, and what it is?
So first, the ministerial committee, we have not had a formal meeting because we are working on multiple things at the same time, but we have agreed on its formation. Minister Chan and I have discussed this. Secondly, we've already got the officials are already meeting and discussing, because they will support the work of this committee. And the secretariat has been established, and MCI will help drive that effort. And the idea is really, because the work is already taking place, as I said, there are multiple strands of work. And the idea here is not so much about adding more layers of work. It is more about synthesizing all of this work, having a holistic view, and to be able to establish priorities in order to move. And that leads to your second part of the question, which is, what are the priorities? So as I said, in a way, there are a few key areas where we can, arising from the impetus from COVID-19 in particular, we can push on. One is helping our SMEs in their digitalization journey, something that IMDA and Enterprise Singapore have already been doing, and we are going further in that regard. And in particular for two sectors, F&B and retail, because as we come out of the circuit breaker, it's going to be a challenging period for them, because they have been quite affected by the circuit breaker and COVID-19. And now as they come out, we want to help them get onto digital platforms, which will help them to connect with consumers digitally, make the payments, and do all the transaction fulfillment and so on. So that's one area around businesses. A second priority is in the micro SME push. And the micro SME push is where, in particular, what we are doing with the hawkers. This is something that IMDA is working closely with ESG, JTC, HDB, and NEA in order to get to the ground and get their transition done. And we plan to do this, over the next 3 months. The plan is for the teams to cover the ground 3 times, or cover the entire ground completely, and to get the conversion rates done as much as possible. Because this is an opportunity, because many of these enterprises are the hawkers and so on are keen to learn, understand how they can do this and benefit from it. So that's your objective. And then when you go a little bit further, because right now with the restrictions, because of circuit breaker, you can't quite have direct contact with seniors yet. But that will be the next phase in the work. Once we are able to, the teams will start reaching out to the seniors and how we can bring them on board. And this is whether it is one-on-one sort of sessions, group sessions, digital learning journeys, etc. But all of these will have to be done in a manner that is safe, taking into account the advisory with respect to COVID-19. And I would say the overriding economic focus is job creation, the points that I made right at the start. So that is going to be a major priority, how we can work with the companies and the labor movement in order to find jobs and then place Singaporeans in those jobs and train them. So job creation and job opportunities in order to place Singaporeans in there is a top priority. Getting SMEs onto digitalization and the micro SMEs and the hawkers. This is going to be the immediate work that we can do. It builds on what we've already been doing. The push in terms of digital inclusion on the ground, especially with our seniors, will then gather momentum. And as we deploy digital ambassadors on the ground and as the circuit breaker measures get progressively eased, we'll be able to do more in that regard.
Wow. Mr. Iswaran, you talked about you've deployed about 200 ambassadors on the ground so far and have covered almost half of all hawker centers. I'm wondering what your ambassadors have heard from the ground so far. Do they feel that, while we expressed that optimism earlier, but do they have a sense of the fear or anxiety on the ground as well? And what do you foresee could be the stumbling blocks ahead, even though you remain confident of the ability of our seniors to actually complete this transition?
I think that's an important question. It's like in all these efforts, you hear a spectrum of views. There are the early adopters who basically are, probably the best advocates, for this whole effort, because they have used it, they have found it to be beneficial, and they want to tell people, look, let's get on with it. And in fact, one of the hawker representatives whom I spoke to, and I asked, so why did you do it? They said, well, just try lah. It's inimitable the way they put it. It's just try, but with the conviction that this is something that can be valuable, and in practice it has proven to work. So that's one end of the spectrum, people who have already moved and been early adopters. There is another group who are interested, curious, want to do, but they want to learn more, and they are concerned about things like, is it going to be difficult for me to do, and is there cost involved, and things like that. So that is where this present effort is going to be very important, because we are going to be able to get the information to them so they understand clearly what it involves. Simple questions like, do I have to have a device here, or is it something where I just put the QR code? So once you explain it, the switch flicks, right, and people understand, okay, better. Then there's a question of cost, and that is where the work that we have done, both in terms of with nets, in terms of waiving the costs, and the work in terms of the program where we are offering them $300 a month for up to 5 months if they adopt the technology and use it and meet the threshold requirements. I think that again becomes not just an incentive, but an assurance in terms of the cost and the kind of concerns and so on and things like that to address that. So, and then the third thing is, what if I run into trouble? What if I have problems? If I adopt it and I use it, but then I have issues. So that's where the digital ambassadors and their ability, they're there, they're on the ground. It's not like you have to call a helpline, wait for the people to, that kind of thing. Because the fact that we're going to have them on the ground and regularly available and accessible, I think it becomes another point of assurance. So that's, I would say, another large group who are keen, curious, and with these assurances are prepared to move. Then there's, I think, a group that is essentially a little bit, probably a small group, who are really wondering, is this really going to be of value to me? Why do I need to do this? And so on and things like that. So there we need a little bit more effort to persuade, because this whole effort with all the solutions and all the initiatives that we have, the challenge is always the first step, which is the owner or the business owner or whoever making the decision that yes, I want to do this. And until they make that decision, all of these are nice to have, but they will not make a difference. So that's the crux of it. So with that small group, I think we will need to do more work, understand their concerns, address their fears, and see how we can then get them to cross the Rubicon.
Hi, I wanted to ask a follow-up question. You mentioned just now that, there's this small group that really need to be convinced. So, during this COVID-19 circuit breaker period, there have been a lot of hawkers and market stall holders trying to go online, but there's also discussions about how their business model doesn't really suit this online environment. So besides helping them get all the technology that they need and the applications, how do we help the businesses actually survive online? And for example, so what if they have the QR code? How does it help their business?
Yeah. So I think.
And what's our end goal with hawkers? What do we hope the digitalization will help them do?
So actually, the interesting thing is, if you notice, even in this COVID period, many have already become quite innovative. Necessity is the mother of invention, right? So they have all, several of them have found ways to sell online, Taobao.com or some other way for them to get their products online, take orders, package, then they work with solution providers to deliver and so on and things like that. So I think the SG QR code payment solution is really a first step, because it is basically getting you onto the journey. And it has a very tangible benefit in that, first, from a healthcare point of view, especially in this COVID environment, you're trying to minimize physical contact and so on. So this diminishes diminishes the risk. And secondly, it also is a more convenient way. Some of the hawkers have told me, so I don't need to, count the money and all that. It all goes in and then I just get a quick account. So it makes them more efficient. It makes things easier for them, right? So that in itself, I think, is a valuable thing. And I think for customers itself, it's an easy thing, right? You can pay and so on, and you don't need to worry about taking cash and contact and so on. So I think that's at a very basic level, the first step. But what else can hawkers do? So, for example, one of the things, in conversations companies like Grab now, because it's like aggregating, when Grab you can order, right? But now if I can provide you a thing where the whole hawker center is one platform. So they can take orders from multiple stalls in the one hawker center. And if that can then be aggregated and delivered, then the same delivery charge is spread out over multiple orders. It becomes more competitive for the hawkers. So that's one example, trying to work together and so on. So, our hawkers are very entrepreneurial. What we need them to do is to understand, we just need to unlock the potential of digital for them. So this SG QR code is one way of doing it. You can then see how this can easily move into a digital payment solution, online payment type solution could be the next step, because if you can link it QR code to your account, next thing is linking from the online to your account, right? And then connecting it to a delivery solution and ordering and so on. So I think there is a journey we have to take. And I want to emphasize, I think digitalization is a journey, it's not a destination. Because today is SGQR. Tomorrow it could be how you can take more online orders for delivery. Day after tomorrow, we don't know what, but we know there are always new possibilities coming on. So we need to get onto that platform so that this whole world of new opportunities is open to us. Then we can let innovation and entrepreneurial energy, take its course.
I think that as we emerge as we move away from all these strict restrictions, right, and we ease them, Do you think that the momentum for the push can be maintained? Because a lot of it seems to be driven by necessity and desperation now, right? There are no customers at the hawker center and you have no choice but to get online. But when people start returning, do you think that, it could affect the push?
So here's the thing. You're right. Necessity is the mother of invention, and it gives you a reason to get things done. But I do believe that even after all restrictions are lifted at some point, I do believe that once our SMEs, our entrepreneurs have had a sense, a taste of what this can achieve, what sort of new possibilities it has opened up for them, I don't think they're going to make a full reversion back to where they were before. So, where we are probably going to end up is a combination, a blended strategy, where they will, of course, do some of the things that they've been doing all along in the traditional way, but I think they will now have a new degree of freedom afforded by this digital push, and they will also be looking at how they can take advantage of that. That I think is probably where we will end up. So it's not as if it's all of one and none of the other. And in a way, that's not such a bad thing, because it means you have a blended strategy, you have opportunities to go either way, and that gives you some business continuity assurance, but at the same time, also new ways to explore opportunities. So if I'm in retail, it's about not just how I can reach out to customers in Singapore, but by going online now, you can also think about how can I reach customers internationally. And thereafter, when restrictions are lifted, of course, you will do business in Singapore in the traditional way, but the opportunities opened up by going international will still remain, and you can build on that, just as an example. So that's my own sense of how things will evolve as we go forward. Not that we're going to swing in one way or the other, but that we will end up finding some kind of balance in the strategies, and each business will probably have to settle on the balance that makes the most sense for them in their own circumstances and given their customer profile.
Minister, I'm wondering if, as we embark on this intense push for digitalization, is our infrastructure, I'm not sure what is involved, but is our infrastructure up to that challenge as well?
I think the main infrastructure that you need is going to be first your mobile, the network capacity in the mobile, and your basically your telecoms infrastructure must be able to get, because that's how the communications are done. And as I have said before, our network capacity today has a healthy buffer of about 30%. And when you look at our experience over the last 2 months or so, the usage, especially when people were working from home and students learning from home, the usage went up quite significantly, especially in the daytime. Nighttime have been the traditional peaks, but the daytime went up quite high, but it was well within the system capacity and we had healthy buffers. Having said that, IMDA has been working with the telcos to increase the buffer capacity in that regard. The second point I would make is, of course, is the work that we are doing in terms of 5G and so on. So that's like looking to the future. That's going to further enhance the capacity and the characteristics of our mobile network in Singapore. All those things that we talk about in terms of 5G, latency being lower, higher volume, faster processing, and so on, supporting more devices. So all of that is going to be very useful and supportive. Not all of it may be relevant for transactions in a hawker center, but if you're a business and SME, perhaps in logistics, and say you're moving more and more towards autonomous vehicles, maybe in your warehouse, in maybe eventually even some trucking and so on, all of that will require this kind of technology solutions, and the infrastructure that can support it. So I would say our infrastructure, we continue to invest in it ahead of demand and in anticipation of the needs, because our infrastructure, telecommunications infrastructure and 5G are the backbone of the digital economy.
Minister, I also have one additional question. You've talked about how our immediate priority is securing jobs, especially in the growing ICT sector. But we've also heard about, and so there's this renewed push among students to learn about this sector. But does it mean that students may have to forgo their interests or passion in other fields in order to secure a future for themselves in this area?
Absolutely not, in my view. And let me explain why I say that. First of all, I think we may have passions in different arenas, but as I said, every arena has had to now find a way to adapt to the new normal and digital solutions. Let me just take an example that might be a bit out of left field, but I think it illustrates the point. Let's take arts and entertainment. You know, the conventional modality has been, whether, you know, in terms of live performances and so on, and how we do it, etc., right? In a theater, in a concert venue, etc., and things like that. But we know that, you know, you just look at the artists internationally. So many of them are talking about online concerts and new ways of interacting with their audience, with their you know, followers and their fans and so on and things like that. So if I'm now someone who's very passionate about performing arts, yes, my craft is the core. That's my passion, that's important. But the way I relate to a wider audience will then find new modalities, and I need to know how I can use these technologies to get across, because that is part of the whole process in that field. I can take the same thing and talk about, say, someone who's interested in fashion. You're very passionate about fashion. You want to design. You want to, you know, interact with your consumers. The traditional modalities exist, but you also know that there are these new ways that you can interact, and there's ways you can reach out to your customers, whether it is in terms of the marketing, the promotion, or the design interface, and so on and things like that. And I think this is going to be not a stumbling block, but actually an enabler for you to pursue your passion. So I can go on and on giving examples, but the key point I want to make is every sector will need a digital dimension brought into it. That's the fact. It's not just because of COVID-19, because that trend was already happening even before, but I think COVID-19 is, as I said, perhaps given it renewed urgency and saliency, right? But that trend has always been there. So then what does it mean for our young people coming out, the fresh graduates, and for that matter, even those who are already in the workforce? I think because the general economic environment is a tough one, we may not be able to get the dream job straight away. But I think if we are prepared to have some flexibility and take on an opportunity that may not quite be the perfect job or the dream, the aspirational job that we wanted, but it gives us an opportunity to learn, to get some experience and so on, then it will allow us, when we then have an economic recovery and more normalcy returns, to be able to transit into other things which are more aligned with maybe our core interest and passion. So that's the way I would describe it. So I don't think digitalization is an hindrance for the pursuit of our aspirations and our dreams. I actually think it can be a key enabler, and it in fact affords us many new degrees of freedom.
Minister, I have another question on jobs. So I know you outlined a lot of initiatives that will create like thousands of jobs over the tech jobs over the say next 2 to 3 years. But I want to ask, how confident are you that the place and training part can be done quick enough so that we can have adequate number of Singaporeans to fill these very specialized jobs without having to, say, look overseas for foreign talent? And the second part of my question is, how are you going to ensure that older workers will benefit from these new tech jobs that are created, given that they will likely bear the brunt from the job losses that are happening or will happen in the very near future because of COVID-19? I know we have the TESA program that was launched earlier this year, but you have any specific updates that you can share in terms of how many jobs created, how many people have been helped, or any goals that you have for the future in terms of this program?
So I think let me just start by saying the key point which you have emphasized is we have to have a sense of reality about the situation we are in. The fact is that the economic environment is a very challenging one and the outlook is bleak. This is borne out by all the facts and figures that we all know. And so, when we talk about creating jobs, we are making a very strong effort. We're not going to spare any effort in this enterprise to create jobs. But we also are very cognizant of the fact that across the economy in all sectors, the willingness of enterprises to take on more people in jobs is going to be dampened somewhat by this economic environment, because they will be concerned that in the current situation that we are in and given the outlook that we have, a company's decision point will be around what are the things I need to do in order to survive based on the kind of economic environment and the demand I can expect. So they're going to have to make some tough choices. And amidst that kind of context, we are trying to make sure that we preserve jobs for Singaporeans and enable them to be a part of that new possibilities that are emerging. So even in a growth sector like ICT, where there has been growth before, and I think it will continue to offer opportunities, but even in a sector like that, we must expect that employers will be a bit more cautious about their hiring decisions. It's inevitable. That is why the work that we are doing involves a lot of deep engagement with the companies themselves and also working with the union. So if you look at the National Jobs Council, it involves not just government but also very deeply the private sector and the unions. So we need to work with the enterprises to say, what are the kinds of jobs that you think you have or that you can create? Because it has to match with their needs, because they have a plan, but they may not want to incur so much cost at this stage. So what are the opportunities? Then what can we in government do to manage some of the transition issues for you? Whether it is in terms of the training and the skills of the people or in terms of the costs. And so this is where some of the initiatives that we are undertaking will be relevant. So if I take, for example, the TESA programs are highlighted, IMDA is working with the tech companies to say, all right, if you would like, we know that you would like to employ X number, what are the challenges for you in this environment, and how can we then partner you in order to make it easier to take on this kind of manpower, and importantly, give them the training and the experience that is going to hold them in good stead in terms of working with your organization or in the larger sector. That's going to be key. So that is, I think, going to be the challenge. So if you're asking me whether it is going to be an easy task, the answer is no. It's going to be a challenging task because of the environment that we are in, and I think we have to be realistic about it. But what we are trying to do is, on the one hand, work with employers to see how we can get them to work with government in order to open up more opportunities on the one hand. And on the other hand, how we can work with those who are in the job market, whether they are fresh graduates or those already in the market, to see how they can then articulate into this, acquire the skills, and then take on careers in these jobs. So your other question was, can Singaporeans do this? Do we have sufficient numbers? Well, as I said, the range of jobs that we can potentially create are from tech heavy jobs to tech light jobs or tech complement jobs. So depending on the kind of job that's been created, the level of technical knowledge that's needed will vary. So where there are more tech light, if you like, is where those of us who come from non-tech kind of backgrounds or quasi-tech kind of backgrounds with some new additional causes or bridging, we can get into those roles. Whereas those roles which are more very tech heavy, I think then we need to start from a base of those who already have some level of training, but they need something to get them to enable them to hit the ground running in those jobs. So you do need a variegated strategy, but the kind of jobs available are quite diverse, and our priority is to get Singaporeans into those jobs.
All right. So in this climate, if a tech company says like, we still need to bring in more foreigners, and if in order to maybe create this department or this new stream of business, what is Singapore going to do? Because it's going to be extremely unpopular now, right? With everybody losing their jobs and all that. How are we going to manage this? And then I have another question that's not related to jobs, but since we are talking about digitalization, and in fact, we might be holding an election during this pandemic, are we thinking also about digitalization for elections, for the process to be able to take place somewhat online, so that in future, if there's a pandemic, Singapore is ready to maybe allow online voting or something?
I think the latter question you should put it to the elections department, because I'm sure that they're working on all kinds of ideas and what sort of time frame and what they can get done. I think you have to put it to them, because I'm not really in a position to answer that. It's not just about technology, it's also about how you can make it work and ensure the integrity and the entire confidence around an election process is preserved, because citizens will be very keen on that before you can make it happen anyway. So I think you should put it to the ELD in that regard. I think your first point is about the balance between foreign and local and so on and things like that. So I think let us start. In my view, where we can, we will do our utmost to place Singaporeans in these jobs. That has to be the priority. That is the priority, and that will be the priority going forward. However, there is always going to be a skills gap in this area, some of these areas, because we may not always have all the people that we need with the level of skill or the requisite skills. And whilst we are committed to training and bridging those gaps, that takes time. And meanwhile, companies may need to move faster, and we need to find a balance. So our strategy has always been to find a way to complement the local talent base with the judicious component of the foreign talent, so that it comes together in a way that makes the whole bigger, the opportunity is bigger for everyone. That's our objective. So whilst our priority is placing Singaporeans in jobs, and we will do that and spare no effort in that regard, we will also need to take cognizance of the needs of businesses, and especially in some of these tech areas where there may be some deficits in the kind of skills they need. And where that is so, we need to find this judicious complement of foreign talent. And that's how I think we need to work, because if we can do that, then the overall outcome is beneficial for all of us, because it enables a company to pursue more opportunities, and that in turn is going to create in aggregate more opportunities for all of us. And that will have to be our strategy going forward.
For us, we mainly serve an audience of readers who do not know English. So I think they are having fear and anxiety about having to deal with technology on a daily basis, and they are willing to learn, but I think they are also hoping for more tolerance.
Absolutely.
From the government and from people around them to give them time.
So I think that's very important, and I do hope that you can help us get this message across, because there are people who feel that we are, rushing headlong into digitalization, come hell or high water. Everybody, whoever can't cope will just be left behind. That's not the case, right? We are doing this because there's a need, there's an opportunity, and ultimately it's a means to a better life and better opportunities. That's really why we are doing it. But we will and so this is going to create more options, but we're not shutting off existing options. And we're also going to be on the ground and helping the adaptation for all our people. So I hope you can help us get that message out. So whether it is having digital ambassadors on the ground, whether it is having some of those solutions like the audio trigger for, transaction has been done in English and Mandarin, whether it is adapting and making sure some of these solutions are available in different languages and so on. That's something we need the other solution providers to cooperate with us. All of this is really just an example of what we are trying to do. So digital inclusion is not just about saying I want everybody to come on board. It's also about doing it in a way that makes it easier for them to come on board. But I will make one last point now, because there are some people, in fact some seniors have told me that, the point you made about patience, then they say, starting with patience from their own family members sometimes. So actually the children and the grandchildren can be important partners in the journey for, say, our seniors. Make it a learning and a fun thing to do together and so on, not a test that needs to be passed. So I think that would be one thing. So I'm quite happy to be going to say, I think family plays a very important part in this, whether it is children and grandchildren. When I talk about the partners we need to work with, it's not just hawker associations or business associations and so on. It's also the family, and helping to help their seniors in that journey.